people do look upon the kind of whatever decade you want to put it, the 60s, 70s, 80s, of Soho in particular, with kind of rose-tinted glasses. Oh, it was much better back then. Well, it wasn't actually. There are, and I've heard I wasn't there, but I've heard the anecdotes about gangs, running doors and this and then drug dealing and prostitution and the brothels and blah blah blah.
There's a perception that perhaps in the more suburban locations that there's not a lot happening, and actually there is, and that's all still part of a nighttime activity.
About 8,000 people live in the city, but 680,000 people come into the city on a busy midweek day. And yet that residential population is able to say, we don't want any noise after 11 o'clock, thank you very much.
I do not think that residents have absolute rights regardless of context. And I think what we have is actually a policy which says that the resident in Soho has got the same rights as a resident in East Grinstead or St Albans. If you choose to live in Soho, you have made a choice of putting yourself in a particular context, and there has to be a degree of give and take which is going to make the wonders of Soho work.
So what we're going to start off with, we'll go around the table. If everyone can just say who they are and perhaps what their interest in nighttime economy is around this table. We'll have three particular presentations, others can comment, and then perhaps people within the audience would like to ask some questions or make some comments. We'll go to them afterwards. So let's just start from that end of the table and come round this way. So Brendan, let's start with you.
So I'm Brendan Barnes. I'm here, I guess, in my role as a Common Councilman in the City of London. I've been a member for about just over 3.5 years. So I sit on the Licensing Committee, which might be useful for tonight, but I'm also chair of the Culture, Heritage and Libraries Committee.
Great. Daniel.
Hi Ron, I'm Daniel Blythe. I'm a senior researcher at Publica, and we're primarily in urban design and research practice, but we have a specialism in nighttime planning and nighttime design. And so we've worked closely with the GLA 24-hour team for a number of years now here in London, setting policy, setting guidance, and supporting boroughs to develop nighttime strategies.
Russell.
Hi there, Russell Potter. I'm director of Soda Architects. We are based in Soho. I'm very familiar with all the trials and tribulations that we probably all face in various different ways, but we have historically done a lot of hospitality work, whether that's members clubs and bars and theatres or restaurants or everything in between. And so, yeah, just interesting to see the way the different parts of the city are feeling the kind of pressures that we all are.
I'm Peter Murray. I'm chairman of the Temple Bar Trust and also co-founder of New London Architecture, where we've been following the nighttime economy and the mayoral policies for that for the last half of a decade, I guess.
I'm Cristina Mateo. I'm Associate Dean at I School of Architecture and Design at I University, which is one of the international private universities in Spain. And I'm also a PhD. I have a PhD in social science and sociology from Goldsmiths College. And nightlife and city living, it's a passion of mine. And I'm glad that Peter proposed this to happen.
Thank you. My name is Alberto Villanueva. I'm the head of Architecture, Built Environment at Ravensbourne University London. I'm also an architect, have been based in London for the last decade. Our campus, interestingly, is in one of the areas of kind of new regeneration of all the area of North Greenwich, Greenwich Peninsula, from the Millennium Dome effect to all the build that is happening with Medgarden at the moment. I'm quite interested about nighttime economy, what does it mean for the city and opportunities.
I'm Diane Cunningham. I'm a trustee at the London Society. We run walks, tours and talks to share what's going on in London. I also run a consultancy called the Assembly Line. I worked with Waltham Forest as London's first nighttime enterprise zone and work on lots of high street projects where kind of evening economy cuts across all of them.
Thank you very much. And I just start off my thinking around the nighttime economy. It was very much influenced by the first London Festival of Architecture, which was 20 years ago now. We grassed over the whole of St John Street, ready for some longhorn cattle, which we're going to recreate what happened in the 17th century when cattle were driven down to the market at Smithfield. And we were doing that at night. It was going to be a Saturday morning, so Friday night we laid the turf. 4 o'clock in the morning on St John Street, people came out as Fabric nightclub, which is probably one of the longest standing and weekends particularly is a full 20 or 24-hour experience. But it's a key part of the sort of history of the city because it's where the cadavers of animals were kept. The bricks are soaked with blood, and people rave there until 4 o'clock in the morning, and then they came out and they lay on the grass in this totally new experience of a street turning into a park, which now it looks like it might well do. But I think that whole attitude to the sort of changing nature of the nighttime economy, which in Clerkenwell was very powerful because there were so many empty buildings there that you could do almost what you liked in terms of noise. The ground used to throb on Sunday mornings with the clubs which were in the area. And what we've been doing over the last 20 years or so is actually filling up all the spare space in London. There are very few places where you can go where there isn't a level of conflict between different activities at night around noise, engagement. And then my second experience was during COVID. I basically did a drawing for the London cycling campaign about how Old Crompton Street in Soho could be pedestrianised, and out of that came a whole debate. I got trolled by people living in Soho saying how terrible it was and all the rows that would ensue and from the parties that took place. But anyway, the streets were closed off for a time, and it created this amazing vitality during COVID when everything else would have probably shut down. So I think the way that the nighttime economy operates in London is so very different in different parts, and I've always thought that actually the City of London, which is specifically geared to the daytime economy and the finances, that actually where there are facilities where people can make a noise, nobody minds because the residents are safely tucked up in bed in the Barbican. And I'm sure there's potential within the commercial centre to have places where people can actually party after everyone has stopped work. So those are my first thoughts of how I experience it. But Cristina, tell us your views about, and also the way you see the difference between the 24-hour city and what we tend to talk about just the nighttime economy, which is really 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. But you look at it as a wider element.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Well, some of the things that I think that are interesting, and maybe they are like wider than just specifically about London, and maybe we can talk about the case of London, which is a place where maybe our city, which arguably could be a 24-hour city, or maybe it was. So we can talk about what has happened maybe to stop being a 24-hour city. So I think that COVID is something that maybe we can talk about as an accelerator of certain kind of trends. To me, what is interesting is also the difference between nighttime economy and nightlife economy. I think that when we think about nightlife, we are thinking about entertainment, we're thinking about nightlife as in fabric, and clubs and maybe partying and everything, all the industries associated to that. But there is actually a nighttime economy which is not necessarily about entertainment. And I think that increasingly, if we are thinking of a more diverse and inclusive world and cities, we need to cater for that. I was talking to Diane about elderly people, and I'm thinking of Spain, for instance, where the average, the longevity of people is like 84, 85 years old. but I mean, you don't have to be that age, but to feel that often you don't have the same sleep patterns because maybe you sleep less. And all those hours you want maybe to be connected, you want to do things. So it's like, how do we think about different kind of walks of life also for people who may need connectivity, but maybe they don't need to be going out in the traditional sense. So I'm interested in that main differentiation between nightlife economy and nighttime economy. And I think that we can go back to some of the issues. Maybe we can also mention the idea of connectivity versus isolation in the city. I think that is a huge problem. People are, or we all are more connected because of technology, but maybe we are also more isolated. So how can the 24-hour city help us to be more connected? That's a question that I would like to tackle today.
Thanks. Russell, tell us your experience.
About fabric, or should I leave that?
Yeah, I feel I was only outside fabric, so if you were inside, tell me more.
I've been both sides, so I've not laid on the turf, unfortunately. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because as you say, the city is for everyone, and that 24-hour, and I think that you kind of hit the nail on the head, that the nighttime economy has become, rather than 24-hour, which I think is a better phrase, has sort of become a bit vilified. And certainly from what we've seen, Soho has been the beating heart of entertainment and restaurants and, yes, clubs and bars as well. And it, because of its geographic location, it's always been this kind of bundle of energy. And I think it's sort of slowly getting eroded by a sort of a bias of opinions. I think, I could take up the whole evening talking about it, but exactly as you said, cheek by jowl, there are residents and then there are kind of visitors, but the visitors by far outweigh the residents. That's not to say that their voices shouldn't be heard, but there are certain areas of town, I feel, that lend themselves to those, activities, and that should also be, not just people going out, but where can you go to the gym, where can you go for a walk? And it seems like a sort of crying shame. Our studio is based on Dean Street, so slap bang in the middle, and on the odd occasion that architects work late, which is probably more often than we'd like to admit, but you can just see it, this sort of shift. And I think that joined up city is a really interesting point. There are people who kind of go there to work. Then there's a sort of post-work drink or dinner and pre-theatre thing, which is a very big part of the kind of West End. But then it sort of peters out. And yes, there are people in the pubs till 11 o'clock or whatever, but we've got amazing facilities and opportunities in this city. And actually, if you are there that late, whether you're coming out from fabric or whether you're going to work early or whatever it might be, huge parts of amazing real estate are just sort of left empty and underused. And I think that poses lots of other questions. Yes, security and lighting and all those things. But if you think of the city in a holistic way, there are amazing opportunities to use these spaces, not just for the Soho Square, for example, absolutely, cramped to the rafters until 5 o'clock and then shut. And it's an amazing part of the town that isn't being used at the moment. So, yeah, I think it feels like there's a really missed opportunity here, and I think other cities are doing it perhaps better than we are. To your point about the city, offices are actually a great, neighbour for nighttime uses because they largely go home at 6, 7 o'clock and there's no one there to kind of complain. So actually, does there need to be a shift throughout? And I know Public have done lots of work on this about how we view certain different parts and how we use that. What happens when that part of the city kind of turns off? And what happens then? Does it just turn off? Do we just leave it then until the next morning? Or is that an opportunity to kind of do something more? And I think, you particularly feel it in Soho, where a lot of the residents have become a very powerful voice, and clearly they don't want revellers out all hours outside their window, but it's a very, very small minority, and I guess it's just striking the balance between hearing what the residents have to say and being sympathetic to that, but also recognising that you can't please everyone. So where's the middle ground? Because it feels very much at the moment that the residents kind of have the upper hand, as it were, and the nighttime economy activities are the ones that are struggling, and I think that's the balance that we need to we're perhaps not getting right about.
Thanks very much. So Daniel, you done research into this, you've written reports for the Mayor on it, so give us your take.
Yes, I'd be happy to. I've got a few slides to talk a little bit about the policy landscape and what we've done with the Mayor of London and the guidance that's been set. So in 2021, maybe there's a longer backstory to this, but in 2016, the Mayor of London appointed the first night czar, and in 2018 there was a nighttime commission to set out what London should do, what London's local authorities and regulatory bodies should do to support a 24-hour city. And among those recommendations, one of those was to set guidance for boroughs at the municipal level, at the local authority level, to set holistic nighttime strategies. So we were commissioned to write that guidance. It was an amazing piece of work. We were very fortunate to be able to learn from lots of other parts of the world that have maybe progressed in their thinking a bit more than London had at the time. Surprisingly, places like Australia seem to be leading the way in a lot of the policy landscape. But we took lots of lessons from Madrid and other European cities. And the main takeaway for local authorities is to really think more broadly about their nighttime or their economies at night, beyond just the traditional bars, pubs and clubs, and to think about your night workers more holistically. So some of the stats in London, it's 1 in 4 people that regularly work at night, and that goes up to 38% for young workers, for people in there, from 16 to 25. So an enormous workforce, predominantly young people. So really starting to think about what boroughs can do to support their night workers, but then also all the sort of public realm design that you can invest in to support sort of sociable places at night. Like I say, a big part of this guidance was learning from elsewhere. It's fundamental, I think, when thinking about nighttime. It's such a new policy area to a lot of officers. Very few people in local authorities have nighttime in their job description, in their roles. It will often split between licensing or economic development. So there aren't, sort of in local authorities, there aren't natural people to hold this work and to lead it. And so what we thought was really valuable was learning from as many precedents and case studies as possible. So the guidance it's about 100 pages. It's too many precedents, but pulling out just a few to highlight the types of interventions we're promoting or that we think local authorities can drive. There's lots of underused and sort of vacant spaces that could be lit, that could be programmed with events. So a lovely example in Hastings, Bottle Alley in the top left. Lots of links between health and well-being, and in this case it's play and children's play, and nighttime and the after dark experience. So pushing local authorities to think about what their play provision is after dark, for example. An example we really like up in North London in 4 Street in Enfield, the Yankatine Living Room Library. So Yankatine Designs Living Room Library in 4 Street, Edmonton. And just really simple interventions when the council invested in renovating the library, putting their bookshelves on wheels and making it very easy to turn the library into a nighttime venue, particularly in a town centre that didn't have a music venue or anywhere to perform. And then public, we do lots of public realm interventions, and one of the things we're always looking at is integrating our lighting and lighting design into all public realm design, using it more creatively to signpost and as a wayfinding tool. We've also, the Mayor of London's also set out very clear guidance for boroughs on the ways in which to engage and research nighttime strategies. I think there's really specific audiences that are often more difficult to reach, or local authorities historically haven't reached quite as effectively, that should be implementing in nighttime strategies. So thinking particularly about young people. So we set out specific guidance on how to engage with young people, the value of spending time in your local authorities at night. We're always struck by most officers operate a 9 to 5 working day, particularly in regeneration, planning, licensing. And so the people that make these strategic decisions about their time centres at night might not know what that place is like after dark. So setting out some guidance on how to audit public spaces at night, and then guidance on engagement. There's really specific questions you can ask people about their nighttime experience. And excitingly in London, I think absolutely the pandemic was a turning point. Since then, we've seen lots of local authorities really grasp onto this idea of planning really proactively. So we've got 5 local authorities on the screen that have published nighttime strategies, with a caveat that the Westminster nighttime strategy is for consultation, but the other 4 have all been adopted. And just for rattling through some of the impacts of those, we've seen Camden remove business rates for grassroots music venues, so providing relief for those venues. We've seen night markets tested in Camden. We've seen Wandsworth re-establish safe spaces on their high streets. We've seen lighting master plans all over the place. Boroughs recognising that they have places that when they engage people, the number one thing they ask for in that location is better lighting. So taking a strategic approach to lighting. And yeah, Ealing's launched a really nice comprehensive new website with a sort of what's on in the borough at night page. So we're really seeing councils take on roles that they maybe historically haven't taken on when planning for their town centres at night. And then just to say, this is my final slide, this is what the GLA are progressing at the moment. So at the mayoral level, there is an idea, again it was first mentioned in 2018, to establish a night test or a 24-hour city test. So making sure that all policy making goes through a formal process of being tested against both the opportunities and the risks of that policy at night. And we've been supporting the GLA with developing this, and it's turned into an enormous undertaking. And what we always recognise when we think about nighttime broadly is that it sits across so many different departments that you almost always need to break it down into its component parts. So we've gone to 4 documents, which is sort of the lowest we could possibly get this down to. But really it's a policy making tool to get people to think, to have a moment to stop and think about, do they know their area at night? Have they, from a really simple perspective as an architect, have you looked at views at night? Have you drawn the space at night? Have you visited at night? All the way to funding streams, other opportunities through funding to unlock new nighttime spaces. And so this is something we're hoping to launch internally at the GLA in the next couple of months as a standard policy movement tool. And so that's it from me, but I'd love to pick up any of those themes, answer any questions.
Very good. Could you just put the last slide back on again, because that is quite interesting in that it sort of covers the issues as to why the 24-hour city is important. And I always thought that the mayor's view of say extending the hours where the city is active was an economic one, but it seems that a lot of the comments now that are coming back are with the loss of music venues and so on, that actually it's the cultural one which is under pressure, and bizarrely put under pressure by licensing regulations, a lot which are regulatory, which one would have thought the mayor might have some view on.
And yes, it's challenging. The mayor certainly has a view on licensing, but it's such a strongly devolved power to local authorities that it's very difficult for the mayor to weigh in on individual applications. And the 24-hour team do a lot of sort of back channel discussions, but at the end of the day, it's policies that are set locally. And yeah, interestingly, it's what we see the most when we engage with people about nighttime strategies. And I think it goes to your point, Russell. It's yes, people want a vibrant nightlife. They want music. They want places to dance. They want places to socialise. But a lot of people also just want somewhere to have a tea or a coffee late at night, somewhere to study during exam period if they've got a deadline. And it's these types of spaces that I think for policymakers, there's a real hook there. They really get that. Councillors, local authorities, they really grasp onto that idea of amenities. And there's particular working populations who have less access to those spaces. So the GLA's done a really interesting piece of research on access to healthy food for hospital workers. And so recognising that a lot of these hospitals are in locations that might have access to a high street or a shop that stays open late, and that's a health pressure that's being put on a night-time workforce. So yeah, I think my advice to boroughs is always to think about those unintended consequences if you have a licensing policy that restricts access to food or hot food at night because you think it's only going to service people that are leaving the fabric at 4 a.m. You might be limiting the opportunities for a hospital worker to pick up hot food on their way home. So sorry, that was much more than 5 minutes.
That's a great, no, that was very, very, very helpful. So Brendan, I don't know if we could bring you, maybe start with, before culture, licensing does seem to be an issue which is actually impacting quite a lot on nighttime economy, which I guess is generally around clashes between different parts of the community.
Yeah, well, it was interesting what Russell was saying about Soho and its residents perhaps having power, because actually that's writ large, despite the residential population being very small in the city. So only about 8,000 people live in the city, but 680,000 people come into the city on a busy midweek day. And yet that residential population is able to say, we don't want any noise after 11 o'clock, thank you very much. You can see it from both sides. You can say we have written into some of our plans that we want residents to have a good night's sleep. On the other hand, you could argue you live in the middle of one of the great cities of the world. There might be some noise, but certainly this discussion has helped open my mind perhaps to more nighttime opportunities, thinking about the difference between nighttime and nightlife, that nighttime activity doesn't have to be getting drunk. And I was thinking about some of our pocket parks in the city, for example. They all close when the sun goes down. That's it, they close the parks. And I thought, what an opportunity actually to think about experimenting with some of those spaces with lighting, keeping them open, making experiences in those parks. I'm not aware we've ever done that. And it seems to be quite a big oversight. So I can think of all kinds of quite interesting experiences and experiments we could do, because there are certainly, I think at the Science Museum, you can sleep at the Science Museum. I'm not suggesting you open all our venues and have overnight, but experiences like that, I think, are something that young people quite like doing these days. But in terms of nighttime, I think there's often a perception that nighttime behaviour is bad, right? If people do things late at night, they're going to be drunk, they're going to be taking drugs, they're going to be making a mess, they're going to be causing a nuisance. That's certainly, I think, the way the city broadly looks at it, certainly the way residents look at it. So although there are pockets of the city that have no residents at all, we do have some 24-hour licences. So I'm specifically talking about the City of London. Most of our licences are restricted because they are within a certain distance from residents, and we have to be respectful. You have to kind of find that balance. But I think also there's a societal thing here that I think young people are not as badly behaved as when I was young, right? They're not drinking as much, and actually they want more experiences, not just about dancing and getting as drunk as you can. And I was thinking about the Barbican foyers, Peter. Obviously that's a space that is used so much during the day. You walk in, there's people all over the place, literally sitting on the floor. It's a wonderful space, and you think, well, actually it's still a wonderful space at night. Why do we close it? Well, probably because the Barbican residents would spontaneously combust at the idea that people might be in there using the space at night. But I think there's some interesting questions that we should be asking about our spaces and how we've used them historically, perhaps without challenging the way we use them.
But some of these things are changing habits and how you deal with it. I mean, certainly I went to the Heart of London Business Improvement District. I went to a seminar they had the other day, and they were talking, just as you said, younger people are drinking far less than they did, and that maybe people are going to bed earlier because there's so much on social media about getting your 7 hours sleep, and it's good for you. But also looking at how people. There's Jeremy King, one of our, I'd say, leading restaurateurs. He said before COVID, people would stay in his restaurant till way after midnight. Now, last bookings are 10 o'clock or something. And as you were saying, pre-theatre meals are a great draw, but means there's nobody eating after the theatres come out in the way they were. And when you walk around areas like Covent Garden, you see, you come out of the theatre, people aren't rushing into the theatre as they used to. People are actually going home. So there's a real shift in the way people act out the nightlife, really. Dan, have you got anything to comment on? Because you look at high streets and so on as well.
Yeah, just to those general points of how we sort of perhaps confuse nighttime and how we talk about it. So there are lots of things going on. So some of the things we uncovered on projects in Walthamstow and other places was, you know, there was a chess club that met in a community centre. There was some candle making above a room in a pub. So we kind of mapped out all the things that were going on, and there's this perception that perhaps in the more suburban locations that there's not a lot happening, and actually there is, and that's all still part of a nighttime activity. It's, I think when we come back to talking about kind of clubs, pubs and the more traditional nighttime, it is very negative connotations, and the media in particular like to be outraged, you know, about behaviour on the street and everything else. I think if we can frame it more that there is a working population at night and they need services and facilities, whether that's to eat, travel, etc., and to do it safely. And if places are more activated, to Brenda's point about the park, most people will feel safer and feel a bit keener to go out if there is good lighting and there's an activity in a park or a square in a high street. You know, if you have a market in a square and at night it's just desolate, it doesn't really create an atmosphere where you'd want to go into the town centre regardless of what was happening. So I think it's more that piece of what do we mean by nighttime. And things are changing, but perhaps everybody's still a bit stuck with that kind of clubs and pubs. There's seems to be a burgeoning scene around kind of getting home before midnight, and there's daytime festivals, and there's lots of other things happening, and the kind of flight club and the golf and everything like that. But I guess the conversation always comes back to this kind of pubs, clubs, traditional nightlife. There is quite a lot already going on that's a bit different.
Yes, but I sometimes wonder whether just gentrification is one of the issues, because actually, I mean, when I was young, Soho was quite it wasn't that dangerous, but it felt like a slightly dangerous place, or naughty place, really. And now, as you say, there's lots of residents there who, anything naughty happens, they get very upset, really, don't they? And there are very few of that older style of so red light districts, all that sort of thing, which a lot of cities are changing.
Yeah, it's interesting because definitely that's something we hear quite a lot, and actually people do look upon the kind of whatever decade you want to put it, the 60s, 70s, 80s of Soho in particular, with kind of rose-tinted glasses. Oh, it was much better back then. Well, it wasn't actually. There are, you know, and I've heard I wasn't there, but I've heard the anecdotes about gangs, you know, running doors and this and then drug dealing and prostitution and the brothels and blah blah blah. So it's hard. Yes, I don't know. Every generation looks at the one before and thinks, oh, they had it better than we did, and I think that's kind of still happening. We are where we are. We're not going to turn back the clocks. I think there are, to your point, gentrification, if that's the right word. Again, I think particularly, that's a spotlight on Soho, and in terms of the kind of buildings and the architectural stock that's there. But you know, the film industries have and are moving out because they can. You know, those prime rental places are there. So, and they were the ones who were going out and probably having, boozy client lunches or whatever it might be. So arguably maybe that was earlier, but they were probably also the naughty people in the clubs doing whatever they shouldn't be as well. So I find the narrative of the kind of rose-tinted glasses a little bit tricky because people pick and choose. And I think, yeah, you're right, there were some bits, and wasn't it great? But if you were there, was it really? And are we actually making progressive steps forward? I think probably yes. I think there is a change in demographic through the people. I think there is a change in demographic through types of businesses that are there. But I also think that the uses surrounding those people also need to kind of adapt with it as well. And I feel like we're in this sort of slight middle ground where there's a bit of denial that, and I'm going to come back to Soho just because it's close to my heart, that Soho has sort of moved on in some respects, but to your point, we still refer back to the old days. So I kind of don't feel you can have your cake and eat it, to the sense that...
I wasn't necessarily suggesting that naughty Soho was a better Soho, and to a certain extent, I would say for visitors, it was really bad because there were lots of stories of tourists would turn up and suddenly find themselves paying £2,000 for a bottle of champagne, which they didn't think they'd ordered. I mean, that sort of thing happened pretty regularly. Not to me in my youth, but I mean, you heard stories about it, and maybe it still does to a certain extent, but certainly not as prevalent. And I think one of the interesting things about the West End at the moment is that actually, might say the conventional part of the West End also is doing really well. The theatres, I think they have something like 5 million more visitors per year than Broadway at the moment, and New York, I think, has find it more difficult getting back after COVID than maybe London has, so the West End. Yeah, I'll just come to Alberto, then I'll come to you.
Thank you. I mean, I couldn't stop taking notes because there are so many interesting points to cover in the conversation. I think that one of the points that where I could start my narrative is that I was thinking that back in 2009 when Ome was presenting the competition for the Taipei Performance Arts Center in Taipei, it was quite interesting that Rem was presenting all those infographics. It was like changing colors from white and black and showing the day and the night, and I was still quite young and inexperienced, and I was trying to figure it out what was going there. And then when you were trying to find out more about the project, you immediately saw that it was related. Obviously there is a cultural difference, but there were elements that are important that we can see in London and maybe we are moving, that makes you think about what is the industrial fabric of the things that are happening. We talk about leisure, but what are the other industrial elements that make the city moving at different times? And one element was about the markets. And I think it's something that we are experiencing in London, that markets are moving out in a way. I have been reading about Billingsgate Market, changing location, I don't know if it's Smithfields, etc. But those elements having hubs of connection, work at different times, create different patterns, and the city maybe is alive in other levels. Then having the market element with the transport connections and hubs, we're creating maybe a kind of another element that is not just about leisure, but it talks about how the city works in a different way. And I wonder to what extent the elements of how we are designing the city, we are considering how we can, that conviviality, how we are coexisting and maximizing, because London is one of the centers of the world, for example, for food, right? But it feels that we are detaching from that experience of understanding how that industry works and how we are connecting things. Then on the other end, just to throw another element, and if you want to pick on any of them, is the safety aspect. I mean, I was recently attending to a debate organized by Open City, Accelerate, and it was quite fascinating because it was a debate led by a woman talking about safety in the city. And I was coming across a project that we are trying to do with a developer about, how people feel safe going at a certain times in London, just from the underground station and walking literally less than 10 minutes to their flats, and how the new residents of that area were like raising concerns that they have to take a bus, they have to take a cab, and we're talking about a 10 minutes walk. And there is a reality of, we can talk about lighting design. We were thinking about doing a lighting design, an urban intervention with the students, but there is a reality about women, young people, kids, having that element of safety. Then those elements is also, I wanted to throw it here because we are talking about that night time, but how the users can be part of that when those elements are part of the problem. I don't know, what do you think?
Well, I'll pass it on to Cristina now. You can either respond to that, but you also had a point you wanted to make, I think.
Yeah, I had a point which in a way has been raised partially by Alberto, because in all this, and we are focusing a lot on London, and I would like to maybe mention some other places, but there is a macro level of the shift in economy, which is basically as the more we are actually moving away from an industrial economy to a service economy, knowledge economy, the shift, the time shift of time shifts has evolved, and also there are more and more kind of flexibility in timetables, and this will have to be handled, and COVID has been obviously an accelerator for this. So nighttime economy is everybody's economy these days, because really we're talking about flexibility of shifts, and this will be more and more the case. We can work anytime, anywhere, we can live anytime, anywhere, we can eat anytime, anywhere, we can play anytime, anywhere, and all these things basically are, that flexibility needs to be managed. Night and day become, really bonus constructions maybe, or they could be. But at the same time, they are like physical realities, which is like safety, mobility. You need to kind of handle these issues. And I wanted to counterpoint the case of London that you were all addressing with what's happening maybe in Spain, where you were mentioning that people are not going out so much, young people are not going out so much. I'm not sure if that's the case across the board. What is happening, I think that there is a degree of choreography, maybe by big companies, which could be running festivals, running music events, which are much more polarized, and maybe that kind of choreography is affecting the patterns of consumption, young people's consumption and also other people's as well. One of the things that is raising is the number of, in Spain definitely, is the number of music festivals. The attendance is massive, but there are like big festivals attended by over 40,000 a day. Between 40 and 70,000 Primavera Sound, Sonar, they are like events which take place in Barcelona mostly, but there are other places as well. So I think that we need to kind of maybe think of what else can happen, what else can we do, interpolating as you were doing. Is there anything else that we can do to activate maybe smaller venues? One of the things that is happening is like Fever, which is actually also, like in a way, global player, are actually organizing these candle night events. I don't know if you heard of them, but you basically can attend these events all over the world. They are like over 100 cities, but they are a kind of, and again, Fever is a very kind of, a global company, but they are managing our leisure in a much more thematized or more kind of narrative conscious kind of way, rather than massive big events. Maybe there is something there which is appealing people, which are not just responding to big global events.
Yes, I mean, it's quite interesting what you're saying. Just made me think about those elements, that lots of activity that you're talking about, how that could translate in a day-to-day of the city, because we are talking about moments that, and it's probably an accumulation of activity that is a reaction on the other end of having to promote. There is a need, maybe there is a space there, but maybe, I'm sorry that I throw in another question there, but it's about the policy making around that, because then in the moment that that business or that promotion doesn't exist, or things work with trends, and maybe these candle nights, etc. After X time is like, okay, this is all news or not. I mean, things evolve, but the reality is that maybe how is the city responding with that policy making? Are we talking about? I remember when I moved to London 11 years ago, and I was living in Greenwich, and I was trying to come to central London to discover things and experience. And if I could see myself on a Wednesday night trying to get back, and I still remember that I ended in Somerset House waiting for 2 buses, and at the same time Tom Cruise was filming Mission Impossible. I don't remember in what time, and I was thinking, how did I end here? And at 1 a.m., but the journey of going back home was tedious. Now we have the night dive happening during the weekends, and I think that helped to transform a bit the accessibility to people not having to be worried. But can we make elements around is transport more accessible, transport hubs? I mean, I know that we are talking about the super loop now, that I really don't know if it works 24 hours, by the way. But what kind of things in policy and things that can be established by Mayor of London, government, etc., could happen?
But I think clearly design and design of infrastructure is a key part of that, isn't it? We mentioned lighting, but that somebody can walk home feeling safe is pretty important. But also, I can remember, I haven't heard architects talk about it for a long time, but I remember 20, 30 years ago, architects would talk about designing, it was council housing mainly, where they would take account that some people within a block would be working at night time, and some people would be daytime workers, and how you created plans which would not, if somebody was getting up in the middle of the night, they wouldn't wake up the people who were trying to sleep down below them. Things like maybe just acoustic protection has got better since then, but there was definite thinking about this relationship between the two in the way you designed blocks and blocks of flats. And also I had an experience not long ago where I was at a hospital, and it was late at night on a wet day, and I was leaving the same time as a nurse who was just about to get on a bike, and I said, "Where have you got to go?" And she said, "I'm cycling to Kilburn." Not that far, but on a mountain like that, pretty miserable after a hard night shift. And right the other side of the road, there was this huge nurses' home which had been converted into very expensive flats. You thought, something's wrong here, really. If you're thinking about people who work like that and actually have these very difficult things to deal with, to actually after a long shift to actually even go by public transport, or that we've given up that sort of convenience, which was actually built into, even a lot of the hospitals which were developed in the 60s and 70s, they had built-in accommodation for medical workers. We just don't do that now, and they have to take their chance with everybody else in public transport. So which I think, just thinking about how you design all the elements of the city is pretty important. That needs to come into people's thinking.
I think as well, I think we all know what the challenges are, and there's certainly global case studies as well. There was quite a lot written a few months ago about New Zealand, which was seeing similar patterns to London in terms of the dining out and restaurants, and people were eating much earlier. But I think there's not much adaptation going on as to how we adjust the evening activity. So I was thinking about the art galleries, and very few of them open late. A couple will maybe do Friday and Saturday, or somebody will do 1 1/4 and they'll be open till 10 o'clock. So I guess back to the point that I think Russell and Daniel were touching on as well, that we've got all these buildings and institutions and things that are going on, but they're very much closed for a large portion of past 5, 6 o'clock. And I guess what the opportunities are if people are drinking less, well, we don't seem to have an increase in coffee shops staying open later, or an art gallery that has a cafe open that then isn't about drinking. So I guess it's the speed at which we're adapting what the offer is, given how much we seem to know globally about the post-COVID landscape.
So, Brendan, perhaps you did answer a comment about licensing, so let's put you with your other hat on, the cultural hat. How do you see your role fitting into a nighttime economy within the city?
This conversation has raised some really interesting questions, because the City of London specifically is absolutely full of culture. But if you did want to enjoy it, you probably don't want to do it late at night, because you wouldn't be able to, because they'd all be closed. So the point you make about the art gallery is a good one. Most people don't know the city has an art gallery. It has a beautiful art gallery, Guildhall Art Gallery, free to go to, fabulous. It's even got a Roman amphitheatre in the basement. But most people have never heard of it. So, we're not doing a terribly good job at selling or promoting our culture and telling stories. Of course, historically, pre-COVID, the city didn't need to, because it had hundreds of thousands of people coming in 5 days a week. And those numbers are going back up again. So anecdotally, there are more companies that are trying to get people back 3, 4, 5 days a week again. So this flexibility doesn't seem to be quite as firm as it was. But in terms of licensing, Peter, we've got more licensed venues in the City of London now than we did pre-COVID.
Really?
So there's been a very significant bounce back. As I say, not many are 24-hour, but there are pockets in the city where nobody lives, and there are a handful of 24-hour venues, but most are relatively conventional in terms of their hours. And the city has always thought of itself as not competing with Soho. We kind of have a vision of Soho that is a 24-hour location. If you live in the middle of Soho, can you be surprised that you get woken up
Yeah.
in the middle of the night? You don't expect that if you live in the city.
But I think, I mean, we were talking about the design of spaces and places and how you get around. I think one of the interesting things about the city, if you wander around at 10 o'clock, it's still quite early, because it does seem, when the pubs close about before midnight anyway. But you can hear the noise for several hundred meters away of these groups, and it's always around spaces which are places. I mean, sometimes they're corners of little squares, or they're junctions at the bottom of Carter Lane or top of Carter Lane. You know, there's a junction there which hasn't got much traffic, but it becomes absolutely rammed with people, particularly on a fine night. And some of them are design spaces and some of them are accidental spaces, but those sort of places where people feel comfortable to congregate are something that one needs to encourage, really. And I often think at Broadgate, I mean, in terms of getting people into the city, Broadgate being fully pedestrianised, you go there at 9 o'clock at night, it is absolutely rammed with people. Presumably a lot of them city workers who are just taking a drinking.
Yes, if you were to go there on a Friday night, you may find that it's not as busy. So Thursday night in the city is Friday night for a lot of other places. So one of our challenges is how to activate a 7-day-a-week experience. So the challenge we have at the moment, still you've got the bulk of people coming in Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Monday and Fridays are better, but certainly nowhere near the level of Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then of course we have the challenge of Saturday and Sunday. If you come into the City of London on a Saturday or Sunday, it will feel like it's empty, it will feel like it's deserted. It's not. It's just got many hundreds of thousands less people than it does the rest of the week. So I think we need to be doing a better job of enticing people to come here. And you've certainly opened my mind in terms of some of the things we could do at night. We shouldn't just assume that everybody wants to come here at the weekend between 9 to 5. There are other things we should be thinking about doing from a cultural perspective, not least opening some of our pocket parks, some of those cultural venues. We've got a bathhouse, for example. Right. Wouldn't it be fun if we went to the bathhouse late at night, or the Great Hall in the Guildhall late at night? I think these are the kinds of experiences that young people really want to enjoy, and because we've never done it, I think it's a big opportunity.
But are people actually leaving the city because they had to commute and spend over an hour to get home? So therefore they really have to rush so that they can get home to a decent time. Maybe what they need is to live closer to where they're actually working, or where they're actually, so maybe there is an additional issue there of why are they leaving so soon?
I think that is a good point. I was going to pick on that, Cristina, because it's changing the demographic. In a way, you were talking about earlier about the difference about how many people live in the City of London, how many people come every day. But it's also, and we were talking about gentrification, but it's the demographic of also people that are going to live outside of London, affordability, but also what is the offer that they find if they have to come to work and commute. We were talking about models like Australia, where a friend was telling me, Alberto, it's amazing, 5 in the morning, people are running in the street, it looks like quite alive. And I was thinking, well, definitely London is not Australia, and definitely I'm not gonna run at 5 a.m. But anyway, but still it was talking about kind of a lifestyle that maybe if people have to commute for 90 minutes or 2 hours or more, the transport links, how it has deteriorated, at least in the decade that I have been living in London.
It's definitely a really big point, but I think we shouldn't fall into the trap that everyone in the city works a city job, and works 9 to 5 and then leaves, because there are, as we said, there are then the people that follow on from that, whether that be the cleaners or the whatever else it might be, plus all the hospitality people.
100%.
I think there's something you said as well about looking at the stock of London, whether that's the architectural stock or whatever. But there was a chef, or is a chef, called Robin Gill. He had a few restaurants, and he opened he called it I think it was called Bloodshot Supper Club in one of his restaurants that was specifically for hospitality workers. Exactly that. You finish your shift at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, whatever. you're serving amazing food and wine to incredible people, and then you can only get whatever, fried chicken on the way home. So actually he would do, it was only once a month, and I think probably got around the licensing, but you had to be bring your own drink and you had to be a member for the night, whatever it was. But it was just really, really successful in the fact that there were so many hospitality workers who can't go and sample the thing that they, dedicate their lives to. And it was once a month, and a chef would go and cook whatever they want. That was the deal. There was no menu. One chef could experiment with whatever he wanted, he or she wanted. But I think to your point, we need to get away from that mindset of people use the city 9 to 5 and then they go home. Yes, there are obviously a big proportion of people that do that, but we need to kind of vocalise with other groups.
Bringing people to live here within the City of London, the corporation has a very strict policy. It doesn't want any more residents. It sees residents as a bit of an inconvenience, actually, so it's completely focused on businesses. It wants the world's biggest companies locating in the City of London. Personally, this is not corporation view, personally, I think if you want to create a vibrant city, you bring people to live in the city. That's how you get 24-hour activity, because we're all different. We all, I'm not really a morning person, I'm a late night person, but we're all different, aren't we? So if you want to embrace that vibrancy throughout the day, the best way of doing it is to bring people to live here. That's not going to happen in the City of London. Not in the short term, anyway.
But you can get more things happening. I mean, one of those elements is on the presentation was economic development. So presumably, if you can do more active things, more hours in the day, that is good for the overall economy, and particularly in the city with hospitality. Maybe it'll all come back, but I would say that generally Friday, nobody's going to come back ever to the city again on Friday. I would have thought in their numbers. So, and the city has been trying for quite a long time to get a 7-day-a-week retail moving. But for your, I can think of bars in Leadenhall Market and Leadenhall Street as well, which are at midnight are very active cocktail bars. If they had the right audience to come, they could carry on all night. Nobody would kick up a fuss about them doing. Maybe you as a licensing officer might do.
But 3 people live by Leadenhall Market, I'm pretty sure. Very, very small residential population.
So they wouldn't affect your decision making too much. But those, because one of the big issues for the city with post-COVID was that hospitality was down to 3 days a week, almost, people having lunch or having drinks after work. Maybe it'll go back to 3.5, 4 days, but there's always going to be stress in terms of the
It's a big challenge,
economy.
but then again, it's an opportunity, because we service nearly 700,000 people a day, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So we're capable. We've got the facilities. It's all there. It's a question of opening it up. So, for example, at the weekend, we've opened up the Royal Exchange for the first time in many years. You can go there on a Saturday. I'm not sure whether it extends into the evening. Certainly not late at night. But again, I see that as an opportunity, because if you were to go to the Royal Exchange on a Saturday evening, I mean, I'm sure we've all been there. It's a spectacular place. So we've got these facilities. I'm not sure. We're doing a very good job at making sure we entice people back, as you say, because they do have to come back. I mean, we're very well served with transport links in London. When the transport works, it's pretty good. Not just the city, but London-wide, I think.
Maybe, if you don't mind me, Peter, it's also about city curation in a way, right? And obviously, if you try to replicate the same thing every day, it's not going to work. I mean, I work next to A2, and obviously 3 days a week, if there is a concert, you get over 20,000 people coming, the business is there, fantastic. You go on a Sunday that there is not a concert, and they barely can sell anything, and obviously you are basically creating an economy that is quite risky, then it's quite precarious in a way. But if you have a curation of the city where different things, and I think the model that maybe you were talking earlier about when in Barcelona and all the areas, if they are a number of events and elements where people feel attracted to go, but you understand how to curate that on different levels. You see the city not as a linear thing where Monday, Tuesday, you see in different moments that happens things, and I think that needs to happen more in the city. How that, I don't know, I say curation, but I don't know how we will call it.
We were talking about, we are talking about how I'm staying as a tourist or as a visitor in Shoreditch, and next to me it's all this South by Southwest event, which is populating like, I don't know how many sites. Well, that could be extended maybe to the city, or I don't know. I mean, it's like that would be an interesting proposition, because it's all, in a way, Shoreditch now is almost like a theme park or retrofitting. Everything is like, you take a photo of graffiti and industrial, post-industrial kind of sites, and everything is, maybe what you need is actually some pristine, looking building, which where maybe a band will be playing. I don't know. So it's just, I think that the idea of catering for not only people have to be residents to stay living and experiencing the area, I think that there can be other uses as well. And visitors from nearby districts or nearby boroughs as well will be interested, I think.
I think to your point about the O2 is a really good example, because there are a limited number of food and beverage operators there. And so therefore, and it's supply and demand, right? So it's slightly chicken and egg. They're not going to open and hope that some people come in. So they're going to kind of close down. So they close down on the weekend, so therefore people don't go in. So I think that chicken and egg, it's almost safety in numbers. I think the city would be a really great place, obviously, and again, not Soho, where you've got a number of smaller operators. I'm just wondering if licensing could potentially play a part whereby, yes, Mr. Operator, you can have your slightly later license, but it's on the condition that you do open on a Sunday or something. Because if they were all going to then open, maybe then people know, oh, actually, there's a choice of 10, 20 restaurants that I can go to the weekend, rather than sort of chancing it and being like, well, does that place open, doesn't it, what the hours, don't know.
Yeah, it is tricky in the city. So I know, the Bloomberg Arcade.
Yeah.
They had leases that said you've got to open on a Sunday.
Right.
But if there wasn't a footfall,
Didn't work. Yeah.
so
Right.
okay,
They didn't work.
Yeah.
So if you haven't got the footfall,
But if you trade it off for a couple of extra hours on a busy night.
yeah, it's
But also, one of the very popular things, weekends where the big attract is people going up the walkie-talkie to the top, and actually even on a Sunday, most coffee shops in the city are closed, but around there they open up because there's quite a lot of things going on, and to a certain extent, a lot of those viewing places you have now on top of 22 Bishopsgate and so on, to be there late at night, you would get fantastic views.
and I don't think they open late at night at the moment. You raise a good point.
They
If we
did
could open
last August. They opened in August because I went one evening, and there was nowhere else to go, like before or after, and it had to be pre-booked. But yeah, you kind of have to come in, go there, and go home again.
That's where it's not joined up.
Kind of,
Any part of London, if you're
Yeah.
going to do something, you've got to communicate it.
yeah, but I think you've got a lot of business improvement districts around the city as well, so they should be in a strong position to be able to encourage the businesses and have those conversations. I mean, that's what we found on a lot of projects, is about everybody has to open or nobody, because if you end up with one or two, back to the other conversation about the restaurants, etc., people won't come because there's not the choice, they don't know who's open, and it takes a long time then to convince them that it's worth coming in.
Alberto, you want to say something?
I hope that I'm not going like completely sideways, but you mentioned earlier talking about, for example, film industry, I think, or moving. And in part of the conversation that we are talking, I think one of the elements that in the particular case of London, and obviously different cities applies differently, is about creative economies. And we are talking about leisure, etc., but there are many things that happen around that kind of a strong identity that London has about creativity. And we can talk about museums, we can talk about industry, etc., but it's true that at the same time, anything that we have been experiencing in the last few years coming from the government regulations, support, even if we go to what kids are learning in schools, in their curriculums, it goes slightly against that. Then also it makes you think about what is that strong brand or identity in living in the city is going to be changing in London in the future, because at the moment I think London can export creativity, but even you're talking about staying in Shoreditch, I wonder to what extent an artist or a creative are going to be able to afford living in the city. And I think there is an element of affordability and that creativity, that kind of, I mean, maybe relation with the nightlife, maybe relation with working on different patterns and being able to afford living in London might be also a clash of what is going to happen there.
But also, maybe Darren's got a comment on this, but one of the impacts of COVID was that actually authorities in outer London were very confident that there were more people staying at home and using local businesses and building up, presumably, nightlife as well. Maybe that's shifting back again from what Brendan is saying, but certainly there is more activity in the outer London boroughs than there was pre-COVID because of working from home and so on. And is that still going on, do you think?
I think so. I think it's in this point where it's tipping slightly back to people are being asked to come into the office some more. But I find at the night time, I think there's much more going on in Zone 2 than there is in the West End. I have no idea where to go now in the West End, and I don't even come in very often, even though I don't live very far away. Whereas Zone 2, for years, there's just been more and more businesses, there's later licences, there's really interesting things going on. Building reuse, pop-up theatres. In Walthamstow, they've just opened the Soho Theatre. They've already said they're seeing a really, really quick result in terms of people coming in and dining beforehand, staying for a drink. It's, the businesses are already getting a quick uplift. So I think there's a sense that people got to know where they live a lot better, and perhaps they liked what they found, and that's still there as a stronger connection with where they live. But it's still in a state of flux, really. I don't think we know where it's going to land just yet.
Good. Well, anyone behind me here like to make any comments or respond to anything you've heard?
I'll make two if I may, Peter.
Yes, sir.
One is, as an inner city resident, by choice obviously, I do not think that residents have absolute rights regardless of context. And I think what we have is actually a policy which says that the resident in Soho has got the same rights as a resident in East Grinstead or St Albans. If you choose to live in Soho, you have made a choice of putting yourself in a particular context, and there has to be a degree of give and take which is going to make the wonders of Soho work. And I think we need a public policy shift away from the absolutist nature of residential rights. Second, I think that our health and safety culture, which is always good, but music venues, for example, were always a bit rough and ready. And from what one gathers, I've never run a music venue, I know nothing about it in detail, but one gets a strong impression is that they are being squeezed by regulation and other concerns. And of course, the thing's got to be basically safe, but that is open to a wide interpretation, and we just need a bit of flexibility on that. And the third thing, Soho himself who made the point about the park, I absolutely take the point about Soho Square. It's a wonderful place. But parks are quite intimidating at night, or can be. And they do need, not to be closed, but they do need people providing a sense of security, whether it's the odd caretaker or two, just being there and being a sense of authority, and that helps to make things work.
Great. Well, we'll come to Russell in a minute. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was going to ask Alberto, because you work next to the O2, and whenever I'm there to a gig, it's just murder getting home. And I was just wondering how you feel about working so close to a big hub on a personal level. Is it more of a blessing or a burden?
I mean, I guess that understanding the context, and I think the main issue is that there is a lack of maybe planning around roads and traffic, and again, it goes again to the transport links and how you get to places, then when you try to generate that kind of a space, if you really don't understand the impact for the people who live there, then yeah, I think that is what is the most problematic thing. Then 3 days a week you have over 20,000 people going through one lane roads with a lack of or reduction of public transport, with a lack of cycle lanes that are functioning. Then there is a lot about the design of the space that it could be done better, and it has a lack of planning probably. Yeah.
Very good. Russell, do you want to just comment on Eric's points about
Yeah,
people
great.
living in busy places like Soho?
Thank you for saying what I was thinking, but didn't say myself. No, I think it's a really valid point, you know, and yeah, I live in Clapham and I've got friends who've moved out of Clapham because it's too noisy. So I think you're right. I think absolutism was the word you said, that if you move into the, you know, the centre of the hot beating heart of it, then there has to be an acceptance that that kind of is what it is. I sort of wonder whether, and to your point about Zone 2 as well, I wonder whether sort of London has become a victim of its own success, in the sense that the very centre, whether that's, you know, the city or the West End or whatever it might be, prices have gone up so much that actually that's why some of the kind of creative industries are pushed out. But actually, and same as whether that's nurses' houses or key worker houses or whatever it might be, they just can't compete with developers based on the kind of the cost of the land. But I actually wonder whether having more residential in those areas would kind of help, because I think you're right. I think the residential voice has got a bad name for itself, but it genuinely is such a small proportion. Like a majority of the people who live in Soho moved there for exactly that reason, that they want to be there and they like being able to walk to the pub and the restaurant, whatever. So I actually think, strangely, widening the kind of residential net would potentially help, because you'd have more voices, and then the kind of the vociferous few might shrink down.
And on that point of the residential voice, or the residents' voice, I don't know, here maybe it's not so much of an issue, but I was coming from, from Mexico City, and all this issue of digital nomads, people who are actually spending kind of long periods of time, but actually not being, you know, really thinking of cities as a kind of extractive sort of forces, where they're actually extracting the best, but they are not actually paying taxes or anything. And they are changing the fabric of the whole kind of neighborhood. Is that something that is an issue here at all? Because that's definitely something which is shaping cities and is very criticized by local neighbors, and they are not necessarily being by policies, they are not necessarily being handled or not regulated fully, not in many places.
I'm not sure I know anything apart from issues around Airbnb, really, which to a certain extent is related to that. And quite a few boroughs have taken, Camden particularly has taken, in response to that, reduced the number of days that people can actually use Airbnb. Particularly in around the Charlotte Street area, which was being emptied out by Airbnb. Is Airbnb an issue in the city? Probably not.
I don't think it's a major issue, no, because even Airbnb is quite expensive in the city. So it's not the cheapest way.
Yes, but presumably there are quite a lot of the where you do have residential here. That's probably city people who maybe go somewhere else at weekends as well. So it's not even your 10,000 people who live in the city aren't probably here at weekends. Either.
Yeah, but I don't think we have data on it. I think we should.
Yeah,
better data, but I don't think we do.
Good. Well, we said we're going to finish at 8 o'clock, but actually it was 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, so we've actually got to carry on a bit longer.
We're going to be for 24 hours discussing this.
More water.
That's the nighttime economy in practice, but just keep going.
Then it's going to be with cocktails now.
Yes, who'd like a glass of wine?
And what happened to the city mayors, the night mayors, to the night, we haven't talked about those, and presumably there is one in London, right?
Well, I think Daniel, probably us around the table, we can comment on that, but you might know what has happened there, because we did have night mayor, you have to say that properly, night mayor, who, and we don't anymore at the moment, but
Yeah, so I think because of the unintended pun, she was the night czar. She stepped down in October this year, and in response, the Mayor of London convened, and it speaks to your points around the difference between nighttime and nightlife. Convened a nightlife task force, which was primarily industry, so nightclub owners, music venue owners, some of the industry bodies like UK Hospitality, and the Nighttime Industries Association. So a lot of people that are doing the interesting things in London at night. It's chaired by the owner of Fabric, and they're doing an inquiry into London at night. So they've got researchers on board, they're doing a survey, and one of their questions, one of the things they've been tasked with answering is, what's the future role of London's nighttime governance? One of the issues with London, I think as we've touched on, is that licensing is one of the main levers that our local governments have to support or hinder nighttime economies, and that isn't at the mayoral level. And the night czar is a mayoral position, a mayoral appointee, and so the reality was that she was getting a lot of pushback on venue closures or restricted licenses or noise complaints without any of the tools to have an impact. And so I think the direction of travel is more towards strengthening some of the ways in which nighttime businesses can lobby, can speak as a unified voice. There are models in primarily the Netherlands and Germany and Austria of nightclub commissions, and so finding a way to strengthen the voice of nightclubs might be one direction that this goes into. Or they might find through their inquiry that the night czar role is the right role and they'll appoint someone else. But it proved very contentious, and even the language around it. There was a lot of pushback on the idea that London was a 24-hour city, and that generated a huge media storm. People go to the pub at 11 o'clock, unable to order a drink, and they'd say, this isn't a 24-hour city anymore, this is an 11 p.m. city. And sometimes the distinction between nightlife and night time and 24-hour, in the public perception, is maybe a bit of an academic distinction. And people are keen to feel safe at night, to get home cheaply and easily and reliably, and to get a drink after 11 o'clock. At least in the media, that's how it's presented. But they should, in October, we should have a report from the Nightlife Task Force, with some recommendations. So watch this space.
What will that be? Just to pay attention.
What would that be? Sorry?
When do you think that the report will be available?
Should be October-ish, but I don't want to sign people up for deadlines.
So one thing, do you know what the success of the nighttime tube has been in terms of usage? Because that must give pretty much some guidance on how successful policies have been.
Yes, so one of the big measures of success post-pandemic was that the rate of night tube and tube usage in general in the evening and nighttime far outstrips the growth of tube use during the day and early evening. And so there's a strong sense that with people working less in the city, leisure and nighttime economies were what people were travelling for. So there's been quite a strong case made to TfL and to the GLA from the night czar and the 24-hour London team, and that actually it's an economic driver, and there's lots of additional lines that connect nighttime hotspots, so particularly some of the overground lines, and particularly boroughs like Hackney that have very limited nighttime transport, that there could be a stronger case to be made for opening those lines later. But there's obviously, TfL there'll be huge pushback on changing driver contracts, on limiting access to railway lines at night when you need maintenance. So it's not it might be politically really quite clever, but it's not an easy thing to achieve.
Good. Well, yes. Right. I'm about to draw things to a close. If you have certainly still to say, we can carry on.
I just was thinking that one of the things that I observe as which is very easy to talk about issues, right? But we are talking about night tube, for example, and things like that. But have the feeling that London is becoming a city that relies a lot on CCTVs, but not the public presence. And I think when you open public transport, mean, you see more issues and you don't have really police enforcement and things like that, is one of the things that you have the kind of the perfect storm, because I don't think we have touched much on the idea of also cultural clashes and multiculturality in the city, and what does it mean about how people understand the city. Then I think in daytime might be what it is, but in the nighttime you might increase also the impact of people behaving differently because they are from different cultures with different ways of behaving in the city. And the city, regardless day or night, is shaped around how people understand how they should behave or how the public space is there for them. And I think, I don't know if police or presence or kind of those kind of things are relevant to the topic, because I have the feeling that we are lacking of that in London nowadays.
But I think that clearly we need to provide the infrastructure for that to happen, that is both safe and also, I mean, if one thinks, I mean, Soho became Soho really in the 1930s when it became a centre for jazz, and that was because there was probably cheap space which other people didn't want because it was slightly dodgy place, but that created then Ronnie Scott's, which perhaps the longest standing celebrated jazz, well, outside of America probably the most famous jazz location of all. But then lots of other music venues opened up, which aren't quite as many as there were back in the 1960s when it was really one, after Liverpool was probably the place where British pop music really cut its teeth before spreading around the world. So I think it's actually when the city provides those facilities to people to use it, they do actually tend to make use of it, and to a certain extent, I'm not sure whether night SARS trying to generate stuff to happen is as important as providing tubes I mean, late night buses have been going for an awful long time, and quite often they are full up with people getting home. And you said that 1 in 4 people tend to work at night, and I have a daughter who's a medic, and if she says that if you tell her it's not a 24-hour city, she can certainly tell you there is, because people get ill every hour of the day and night, really. So I think there are lots of people engaged in delivering that 24-hour city, but we need to make sure, at least from our role as people involved in the built environment, is actually ensuring that those facilities, those public spaces, safe spaces, communication, all that sort of thing is there. And so Brendan can now go and deliver it all. You see, he's in a powerful position in the City of London. So, well, thank you very much for your contributions, and thank you all for coming. And I hope you found it interesting, informative, and it's been really good discussing, I think, a really key issue. And we look forward to seeing the outcomes of your deliberations later in the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you.